Eli Drinkwitz is raising expectations this offseason, but is that necessary? Let's talk about it on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And I gotta say, I'm stunned by the amount of people who are critical of Dennis Gates offensively right now. Definitely going to get to that a little bit later in the show. Do want to remind you quickly, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. But I do want to start talking about the gridiron today and getting back to Eli Drinkwitz's recent comments that this 2025 team is his most talented group yet. Now, there's a couple things here. Number one, is Eli Drinkwitz being sincere here with these comments? Well, I don't have any reason to believe that he's being insincere, but I will say this. Eli Drinkwitz is nothing if not a salesman. Notice that Drinkwitz did not say this is my best team. What he said is this is my most talented team. So he can easily wiggle out of this statement later on if indeed he starts his own podcast someday like me. You always got to leave yourself an out, ladies and gentlemen. That is the important thing. But in all seriousness here, my question is, when you're doing this, the question is why? Why raise expectations at all, quite honestly, in the offseason? Take Gary Pinkel, for example, the great Missouri football coach. Well, he and Eli Drinkwitz seem to have a very good relationship, and yet the approach here is quite different. Somebody remind me of an offseason where Gary Pinkel was hyping up his roster as the most talented that he ever had. I don't think anything even approaching that type of statement ever came out of Gary Pinkel's mouth. Now, I know toward the end of his career and his tenure at Missouri, Gary definitely loosened up a little bit. Hey, remember the Pinkel copter? Famously, Gary flew down to Springfield to see a Dorial Green Beckham high school game, or the Pinkel dance for that matter, in the celebration of the 2014 Cotton Bowl. Again, I'm all of those things aside, some fun moments in the locker room, that type of thing aside, I'm just trying to remember Gary hyping up his team in the offseason like this. But again, I'm not being critical here of Eli Drinkwitz. I'm just pointing out that there's a very different approach here. And so far, it seems like really both approaches have worked. Of course, Pinkel took the Missouri program, the football program, and raised it up to levels it had not been really in the cable television era. You had to go back to the 1960s to get to a better period of Missouri football. Well, so far, Eli Drinkwitz, his strategy is working as well. And what I'm thinking is maybe this is what Drinkwitz thinks he needs to do at Missouri. The Tigers in the SEC, of course, now have been for many years now. That's not anything exactly new, and yet at the same time still relatively new for Missouri, just not even 2 decades into this little SEC experiment here. And Missouri has had some success and certainly some failures too. The reality is, money-wise, at least for the foreseeable future, forever is certainly a long time, but in the foreseeable future, Missouri is going to be at a deficit in terms of spending, revenue, interest from the fan base, and also geographically, just Missouri not as fertile of a recruiting ground historically as Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, South Carolina, Mississippi, certainly Florida and Texas, and Oklahoma as well. So Missouri is going to be a little bit behind the 8 ball. So if you're Eli Drinkwitz, this is what I think he's thinking anyway. He almost has to speak greatness into existence for this program. Because, again, getting back to Eli Drinkwitz being a bit of a salesman, and I don't mean that as an insult whatsoever, by the way. What I mean is Eli has to sell you on something. And when it comes to salesmanship, the very little that I know on the subject, well, one thing you want to figure out quickly is what is the main obstacle that the person has to get over in order for you to get to that sale. Well, as from a Missouri fan's perspective, from a potential high school recruit especially, what do they really want? If they're thinking about coming to Missouri, if they're thinking about buying in as a fan and getting season tickets, that type of thing, but they're sort of on the fence, well, I think what they want is for Missouri to be considered big time, to be up there with those states and those programs that I alluded to just about a minute or two ago. I think that's what Missouri fans and recruits really want. They want to think of Missouri as among those big-time programs. Maybe even somebody would be crazy enough out there. Who knows? I can't imagine anybody would be crazy enough to say this. But maybe they might even say that Mizzou is like a modern-day blue blood or something like that. Could you imagine the audacity of somebody making that statement? Well, Eli Drinkwitz hasn't gone that far, but I'll tell you this, the sales pitch that he's pitching right now is definitely working, and now time and time again you're seeing Missouri up there in the high school recruiting battles and the transfer portal battles as well with the traditional blue blood programs like Georgia, like Oklahoma and Texas, et cetera, et cetera. So, interestingly here, once again, arguably the greatest coach in Mizzou football history, Gary Pinkel, with a completely different approach to off-season hype, and yet it's working. It worked for Gary Pinkel. A totally different approach in many ways is working for Eli Drinkwitz as well. So how can you really argue with it at this point? And if you missed yesterday's program, I talked a good bit about why the basketball portal, transfer portal, is a little bit off to a slow start, not only for Missouri, but for the rest of college basketball as well. One thing, there's another dead period here in the portal coming up on Thursday through April 10th. So a week period there. And after that April 10th day, again, I'm going to assume that's where business is going to pick up much more quickly in the portal at that point. Now, again, as I pointed out yesterday, you don't want to assume too much right now. So many things are changing so quickly, and every portal cycle has been different so far, so you don't want to assume too much. That's for darn sure. I will say this. I think the transfer portal has maybe caused some fans to lose a little bit of touch with reality, just in terms of what is available to Missouri and most of these teams in the transfer portal. One listener, for example, said he wants to focus on a big man who can score with his back to the basket and make 80% of his free throws. Okay, great. Let me know who that person is, by the way, because I'm not sure that Arthur Johnson and Steve Stepanovich are walking through that door. But I'll just say especially the idea, and I've seen this thrown out there too, that Missouri needs to tweak its offense and shoot fewer three-pointers. Well, I'm trying to figure out what exactly that is all based upon, because I think the people who are complaining about Dennis Gates' offense right now are really missing the point. So let's get there here in just a minute. But first, have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where the heck did all my money go? Well, between dining out, online shopping, and going out to the movies, for instance, it's easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO. And Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center for tracking all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. Plus, you can easily collaborate with a money managing partner. I'm talking, hey, just your actual partner, your spouse, or a professional. You decide, track all your shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first order. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. And imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd and witnessing unforgettable moments. Hey, I'm sure you Cardinals fans are pretty excited right now, am I right? 4-0. Let's get out to Busch Stadium. How about that? And I'll tell you this, if you're looking, obviously there's 40,000 some odd seats in Busch Stadium. Well, Game Time Picks is going to make it so much easier to find the best values and quickly just taking out all the fluff. It's going to get you right to the best deals. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Obviously, in the wake of the loss to Drake, I can understand people's frustration, especially in the moment. But my goodness, a couple weeks later here now almost since that loss, I think people need to take a breath, take a step back, maybe get outside, take a walk, forget about Missouri basketball for a second, at least when I'm not talking about it, right? I'll tell you what to think. That's what's important. But seriously, though, I do think people are overanalyzing Missouri basketball a little bit right now. Now, don't get me wrong. I think Missouri may have played its absolute worst offensive game of the season at the worst possible moment against Drake in the first round of the NCAA tournament. So from that perspective, I understand the nitpicks, but when you look at the bigger picture, well, number one, I think, 2 out of 3 NCAA appearances for Dennis Gates. I think when he was hired, we probably would have taken that. That's a heck of a lot better than Kim Anderson or Konzo Martin did, and it's the same as what Frank Haith did. So not exactly a disaster so far. But defensively, you see, that's where Missouri has been a borderline disaster under Dennis Gates, and really that is what is holding this program back under Dennis Gates, at least so far. Now, Missouri made some big improvements over the long haul defensively this year, but unfortunately, the last month of the season, well, it was a lot more like the first 2 seasons, and the first 2 seasons under Dennis Gates were 2 of the worst defensive seasons. In fact, they are the absolute statistical 2 worst defenses that Missouri has had, was year 1 and year 2 of Dennis Gates. This year was fair to middling, again, until the end of the season where, again, the defense just completely fell off a cliff. And for all the people wondering what the heck happened with Missouri at the end of the season, that's the simplest way to look at it. Missouri just stopped getting stops in the last month or so of the season. We can analyze the reasons for that, but I think that obvious reality is exactly what it is. So the idea that Missouri needs to focus on getting the ball into the post to a post player who can make 80% of his free throws and that Missouri needs to shoot fewer 3-pointers is based on what exactly? Again, I understand that Missouri wasn't great against Drake, to say the least, offensively. But for the rest of the season, during this season, according to KenPom, well, Missouri was 8th in the entire country in terms of adjusted offense. They were 9th Dennis Gates' first season in 2023. Only the 2012 Tigers that were number 1 in the country under Frank Haith, only that team had a better offense. So 2 of the best 3 offenses in the post-Norm Stewart era have happened under Dennis Gates. And the other one, well, obviously the 0-19 campaign that, listen, I'm not hand-waving the entire thing. Obviously, I'm including it on the negative defensive side. But I am willing to give more of a benefit of the doubt on the offensive side of the ball because of those 2 elite seasons versus I haven't seen anything approaching elite defense yet from Missouri. I'm not even saying that Missouri needs to be elite defensively. What they can't be is a sieve. And the Tigers were a sieve the first 2 years under Dennis Gates, and also really the last month or so of the season as well. All of the statistics bear this out. If you want to argue with the spreadsheet, go ahead. I don't think many Missouri fans are going to argue that point who watched all the games to close it out. So bottom line here is, while obviously, heck, if I can get a guy who can be an anchor defensively in the paint, block shots, protect the rim, whatever way you want to look at it, if I can get that guy, and he's a guy who can make 80% of his free throws and play with his back to the basket, well, fantastic. That sounds wonderful. Unfortunately, I don't know the name of that particular player. If you can point me to him, let me know. I think more realistically, what Missouri can maybe get in the portal is a guy who can be a stalwart in the paint defensively, probably not as good as Josh Gray, but probably more of a threat offensively than Josh Gray. I think at the very least you can maybe find a 6'10", 6'11" guy who can at least space the floor in theory. Maybe he's only a 29-30% shooter from three-point range. But these days you can trick defenses into thinking that that guy needs to be guarded. And there is value to that by simply getting the big man out of the way of the rest of the offense. Sometimes that really does provide a lot of value. Believe me, those of you who are disagreeing with me, this is not my own novel idea here. This is basically the entire theory of pace and space come to life. Again, bottom line here is, obviously I would love for the perfect big man, the perfect multi-talented big man to emerge onto the Missouri roster next season. But in terms of more realistic trade-offs, once again, I just feel like a more defensive-oriented big man is going to be the correct trade-off for Dennis Gates' team next season, just based on, well, how his defenses have played out so far. I think if you're going to improve dramatically on defense, that's probably the one spot you can make it happen, because in the portal, I would say Gates is going to have to focus a little bit more offensively on his perimeter players. That may well be the case. But by the way, in terms of a guy who has shown talent with his back to the basket offensively, to me that guy is already on your roster. It's Peyton Marshall. How much Marshall develops this offseason into next season could go a long way to determine just how good Missouri is next season, by the way. And coming up, former Tiger Aiden Shaw finds a nice place to nest for his final season of college basketball. Plus, I'll have some quick thoughts on the rest of the sports landscape at Mizzou coming up. But first, let me tell you about Supply House, where you can get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades. Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. With a complete inventory of more than 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. And their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks for the pros, like a dedicated phone line and free shipping. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. And while the transfer portal has been a slow go so far, obviously Missouri's Javon Porter is already in the fold. Well, a former Tiger, Aiden Shaw, found his landing spot too with the Boston College Eagles. And I have to say, this seems like a great spot for Aiden. I wasn't necessarily sure he would wind up in a high major conference. So in a spot where obviously I think Aiden thinks he's going to get more of an opportunity to play minutes in Boston College against ACC competition, I'm happy for him. I really am. And I hope he does very well. Boston, obviously, in my opinion, I've visited there a couple times, including at Chestnut Hill for a football game, by the way. A few years ago, the Tigers took on Boston College. I think Boston's a cool city. Good place for a young man to spend a year. That's for darn sure. So good luck to Aiden Shaw out there, and also good luck, obviously, to new Missouri women's basketball coach Kelly Harper. Was introduced to the fans yesterday. Had her big press conference. One thing that stood out to me, she said, this past year, as most of you know, I was not coaching. I did have an opportunity to do some work with the SEC network. I loved it. I thought it was great. But at the end of the day, I'm a basketball coach, and I knew that I needed to be back on the sidelines. By the way, interestingly enough, Sophie Cunningham got to ask a couple questions in the interview process as well. I'm assuming via Zoom or something like that, maybe just to get a little bit different of a perspective on some of these candidates, I suppose. But from Kelly Harper's perspective, again, being cautiously optimistic on Harper, I really think her taking a year off from coaching and deciding that, yes, I want to be thrown back into the fire of the SEC, I think that's a good sign for Missouri. And for Harper, I think her taking a year off from coaching, being able to just step back for a second and not be on that constant grind, that constant hamster wheel of recruiting, especially in the new world of NIL, the portal, everything else. It may not be as wild as the men's basketball side, but it's certainly a lot more wild than it used to be. And just as the men's side is, it's more wild than it used to be on the women's side as well. The point here is that somebody like Kelly Harper, who has seen, obviously, the old system, but is still clearly young enough to evolve for the new system, I think she's kind of, she should be right in that perfect spot here. I just like the fact that after seeing what the new system looked like, and maybe it didn't 100% work out the way she or Tennessee would have wanted, the fact that she took a step back for a year and decided, yeah, I want some more of that. I admire that competitive spirit, and that's something obviously she's going to have to win at Missouri. And speaking of winning at Missouri, the Missouri gymnastics program has been doing a lot of winning this season. This weekend, in fact, Friday at 3 is the beginning of the Tigers' first session. I'll definitely be checking that out. Unfortunately, on the diamond, not a lot to be happy about right now other than softball with their lone SEC victory over Oklahoma for its lone loss the entire season. The sort of John Wooden UCLA-like run that the Oklahoma Sooners softball team is on right now. Don't exactly think Larissa Anderson is any type of trouble or anything like that. Just from my perspective, a very casual Missouri softball fan, just seems like they don't quite have the pitching this season. And if you don't have the pitching in that sport, especially in the SEC, it's going to be a tough road to hoe. And I got to say, speaking of tough roads to hoe, it's going to be tough for anybody in Missouri baseball right now. And I have to say, Carrick Jackson in year 2 with the Tigers sitting at 0-9 in the SEC, starting to get a little Kim Anderson vibes here, just in terms of in year 2 here, you felt like, Anderson was definitely going to get a year 3, but at the same time, there just didn't feel like there was any hope for the future. And I hate to say it, it kind of feels like where Missouri baseball and Carrick Jackson is right now. I really, really hope to be proven wrong, but it just seems like, if anything, Missouri should have kept Tim Jamison around and maybe appreciated what he brought to the program a little bit more. So with all that being said, thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen today. And for your second listen, check out Locked On College Basketball on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. So until next time, I am John Miller, and this has been Locked On Mizzou.